Welcome back to the Compassionate Capitalist Show. So today, here's the reason why you want to listen to this whole podcast. Do you have a big problem to solve, that you lost a strategic customer or a partnership that has put your business into a tailspin? Or perhaps you have a new hypothesis about your business, a new test, a pivot you want to make, or a new product you want to bring out? Maybe you're even still trying to make your first million and put it in your pocket. You love the idea of your business being a force for good, but you don't know how to pivot your company or scale your company to have that triple bottom line of people, planet, and prosperity. So this podcast is for everyone listening now, because it is the number one things that keeps startups being able to scale up. And we're going to talk about that with my guest today, Howard Chang, the tools, the teams, the process required to build the next big thing. And then I'll be throwing my 2 cents worth in there about getting the capital launch and growing through to adolescence and from adolescence stages of business to maturity. So let me tell you about Howard. Howard Chang is an accomplished entrepreneur, a change maker with over 20 years as a CEO. He's demonstrated resilience and adaptability, founding and exiting 3 startups. His ventures span retail, sports, film, so many different industries. And as you're going to hear, because of his latest venture, he gets to stick his finger in the cookie jar, his hands in the cookie jar. I'm not sure how to describe that or what's the right visualization for that, but he gets to be involved in molding entrepreneurs of all different kinds of industries for their future success. And we'll talk about that. He's also had some serious setbacks in his career as an entrepreneur that would have sent lesser founders back to the W-2 of a cushy job. And so what you have here is a clear indicator of the difference between an entrepreneur that has been born or bred. And we're going to talk about that, because I would bet money, at least few of you are listening, have questioned in your own back of your own mind, are you in the right lane or are you kidding yourself? Heck, I know. I mean, I still do on occasion when nothing seems to go right. But in Howard's case, his setbacks weren't just a bad day, but here he is, founder, CEO, and the driving force behind the turnlab, a thriving marketing and technology firm headquartered in Toronto. And welcome to the show, Howard. Terrific to have you on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So let's talk. Let's see let's dig into some of this kind of stuff. First thing I want to ask, and then we'll go back and we'll dig back into the further piece of it, is so at the time that you sold your other company, which was considered a radical move, I guess, instead of just, continuing on, but you had a passion and a purpose to leave that working business model and start a new model of an agency that could solve some of these big business problems of intersection of marketing, culture, and technology. Talk about why you made that decision.
Well, I think part of it was professional, part of it was personal. Around 2015, 2016, I was running this wonderful, mid-sized, multi-million-dollar integrated ad agency and doing very well. But I started to see the writing on the wall. I talked to more kind of C-suite executives that were talking about their need for thought leadership, thought partnership, strategy versus, what most agencies deliver, which is often very tactical, right? We're going to build you a campaign. We're going to buy some media for you. We might even build a website for you, but we're probably going to farm it off to India, right? Like very tactical. And so I decided, we had to make a change. What catalyzed the change was actually a cancer diagnosis.
Okay.
So in 2017, I was actually diagnosed with prostate cancer and fairly advanced. And so I had to think, oh my God, what am I going to do with my life? So as I was going through treatment, and thank God I got through it, but in the middle of it, it's pretty existential when you're diagnosed with cancer. I had to rethink, well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And I thought the treadmill that I was on in the traditional agency space, really wasn't serving, I think, what business leaders want. So wing a prayer, I actually started a new company called the turnlab, and we like to call the turnlab a consultancy-led marketing technology company because we lead with research evidence to drive strategy, which then leads to various executions. But frankly, it was a risk. We went from a 55-person thriving company to 12 people starting this little shop and trying to explain what we're doing and learning what we're doing at the same time. So, that back to that, are you an entrepreneur? Well, you sort of have to have intestinal fortitude to do things like that. But like I said, it was both business and personal that sparked that move.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to dig more into turnlab because I think, you are doing that, triple bottom line with that. And we're going to get into that because that gives you, what you're doing there gives you a lot of joy, which I think is a big part of staying healthy. Right. Sometimes
Absolutely.
the stress and the work and the things we do can really make people pivot. And sometimes it's just that they don't pay attention to their early warning signs or different things because they're so busy. They believe they're so busy trying to accomplish something on this treadmill that they're on. So, well, and to that point of born or bred, I think part of the intro work was that you started your first company at the age of 20, right? And amassing your first million by 23. That's to those that said, I asked the question at the beginning, if you have not yet made your first million, this person's going to be able to tell you that. Yet you face bankruptcy at 29. So there's a high and a low. It took you 3 years to make it. At least it was like 6 years to lose it. But that can really be something that is hard to recover depending on the timing of when it happened and the circumstances. Because I know within my own business, I had similar challenges. I thought, everything was I was managing it so well until one lender decided to call the note. And then in my case, that was just became the death spiral. And but you turn that around, you vanquish your cancer, right? And then TurnLab partners, not service providers, to help here. I'm reading off of I got this off of his website, but to give you, because I always think it's great to, when I see a company that's doing something really great, let me toot their horn, right? So partners, not service providers, to help businesses solve the big problems of how to stand out in a crowded field, evaluate the validity of bringing a new product to market, or win the struggle to remain relevant. And we're going to come back and talk about examples of that as well. But let's first talk about that experience. When if you can recall the joy, how did you make your first million? And then how did you lose it? And the lessons learned from that 9-year, 10-year period of time.
Yeah, so I have a background in sport. I've been competing in various sports for quite a few years, and some of them at a fairly elite level. So I'm a bit competitive by nature. And so when I started my own business, I had no idea what I was doing. I was 20 years old. I was still trying to finish university. But I learned quickly, and I would say I was a little bit lucky. It was a good time. It was the early 80s. And if you remember in the 80s, everybody was buying everything and selling everything. And it was the crazy 80s, right? And it took me 3 or 4 years to build a very, very strong business. By the time I was 25, I was driving a Porsche, owned a beautiful home. And then I kept kind of getting in my own way, in the sense that I was so successful that I thought I was the smartest kid in the room, and I didn't listen to good advice. And I was determined to grow, grow, grow. And soon I was doubling, tripling in size, but I was funding it all on 17% bank interest. So if you remember the 80s, do you remember the 80s? Like in the
Yeah. Oh, sure.
latter part of the 80s, bank interest was 17%. Like, some of the younger listeners are going to fall on their butts listening to this,
Yeah. Right.
but they think 6% is high right
I know.
now.
Exactly.
Right. So when you look at that, the bank did something very similar to what happened to you. Is they saw all my assets and they he's got this house, whatever. They looked at what was happening to my business, and they actually called their note, and they forced me into receivership, and eventually went bankrupt. So hugely humbling, but probably one of the best lessons I ever got in business. I'm probably one of the best cash flow managers now because of all of that. We self-fund now. We're very strategic how we use debt financing. So I learned a lot in that process as I rebuilt my next companies. So I think sometimes when you get knocked on your butt, as long as you take a moment to think about why you failed, how you failed, what you might have done differently, those become valuable lessons.
Right. Right. Yeah. I have since that time. I think it's called the waterfall. I listened to a podcast about it, and it is where, calculating how much cash reserves you need to have, and this, and the kind of like the waterfall effect of how you flow money and pay yourself or your long-term goals, but always making sure that you never over leveraged, right?
For
And
sure.
it was such a simple methodical way of going about doing it, that you because I think and I think has become a lesson for during COVID, right? When there was some government money that came out to help businesses, but the ones that really struggled were ones that assumed the cheap money was going to be here forever. And it wasn't, it isn't, I mean, we had
Yeah.
suppressed we had the zero interest for way longer than it needed to be. It was put in place to recover from the great recession of the real estate financial fiasco, right? And try to
Mhm.
jumpstart a business by getting banks lending and all that kind of stuff. And then it just stayed and stayed and stayed. And it's like a dam with, I always think of money as like a living being, almost like a river, in that it will find a crevice or a crack or something to break through, and 0% interest was just building up until there was just no way. It had to rebalance, right? So
What
uh sometimes it's people like you and me that have the gray hair have the benefits of living through the 80s and understanding what that was, the benefits of the Great Recession and the effects of that have, you know what I mean? And that gives us, and then I think for you as well, and then also advising these companies that you're advising, it gives you a sense of long-term potential of how to navigate some of that, anticipate and recover from it, and belief that you can recover from it.
Yeah, because part of our job and our role at the Turn Lab is as an incubator. I talk to a lot of young entrepreneurs, young startup founders, and one of the most important pieces of advice I give them is cash flow management, right? Like funding growth with cash flow is very difficult. And I think you know more about this than I do, but that's where like angel investors can play a big role in terms of helping us. Growth costs money, right?
Yeah.
Like, so in my case, like more of a professional services company, if I land a big contract, I may not see a dime of that for 90 days. And in the meantime, I've got to hire up staff. They're now my payrolls, gone up 50%. Companies go under because of situations like that. So I do think there's a lot to be said around how to use your cash in a really smart way, how to leverage outside investors, in a way that aligns with your business strategy. Money's never free, but deployed properly, it's a very powerful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's use that as a segue to talk about the incubator side, and then we'll talk about the business problems that you solve for established companies that I
Yeah.
kind of alluded to earlier. So, because I think it is so true. And the reality about angel investors is a term that has a whole lot of flavors to it these days. From even within the crowdfunding space and companies that are out there, people can invest little bits of money that all come together. And then you got your community-based investing, where people within a community, using the exemptions that these states have offered, can invest in a business that might be growing or could be, through an incubator that's in their community as well. But there's also those companies that have hit a thing. And this is where you and I align really well, is because a lot of your companies that are in, I call them the Midlands, right? They're the ones that are in a portfolio of your traditional angel group or venture capital firm, mostly in the angel groups. And that whole thing of 10 companies, out of 10 companies, 2 will fail. One will get really, really hit it out of the park. 3 will do, triples and doubles. And then there's a bunch that are just sort of in the middle, and they're just sort of kind of not coasting, but they're just sort of, they're growing organically because they didn't get their next round of capital. And what happens is they had this original plan that they were going to launch another product. They were going to, this was their first product. Then they were going to go into these sectors or into this stuff and things like that. But they can't get the money to do it. They can't get a bank loan to do it. They can't get, because they need more cash than what they can do based on their cash flow. They can't go to private equity funds because they're too small. They missed the VC boat. They can't go back to angels. Where do they go? So, I have solutions that I work with companies on to do that. But a big part, and I'm actually working on a second book, that'll follow after, I have this one, Inside Secrets to Angel Investing is about learning how to invest in companies such as this. The next one is going to be Inside Secrets to Scaling. And what you do with figuring out, should you bring this product out? Is it the right market fit? Is it part of your growth strategy? Right? Is it all this stuff? And there's a lot of investors out there that I would call retail investors. They're familiar with stock markets. They're familiar with looking at balance sheets and things like that, that would never go into a company that's bringing their first product out. But a company that needs capital to bring their second or third product out, they would understand that. They just don't know they have the ability to do that. So that's kind of part of why I do this show, and part of why I do the digital education that I'm launching, is to teach regular people that they can take a part of companies like that are doing that. So with that sort of as the foundation, talk about how you are working to incubate companies with the turnlab. Those are primarily startups, I guess. And then we'll go into sort of your science and methodologies for companies figuring out, do they bring out a second or third product?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the great benefits of the turnlab is we have tons of other clients, right? Paying clients. So we have, global brands like Yamaha. We have global not-for-profits like Oceanwise. We do lots of great work for them, research, strategy, digital transformation. So we learned a lot from working with all these amazing clients. So when we work with startups, there's an old saying in design that ideas are a dime a dozen. And I think it's quite true. The gold is always in the execution. Like, how do you actually execute? So I talked to a lot of startup founders, especially in the tech space, that have this great idea. And they think that, by getting their cousin and their nephew to help, who've done a little bit of computer science, to bang out some code in the basement, is going to turn this into the next Facebook or the next Google. And what we've learned is that, the successful startups are the ones that actually understand there's a whole ecosystem for success. And a lot of it boils down to really understanding, business, number one, but also understanding, how do you actually bring a product to market? So audience intelligence, using data, how do you build a strategy with that evidence? How do you execute on that strategy with a certain methodology and professionalism and consistency to be able to look at your performance, measure it, and then iterate? So, I think building a business is much more complicated than coming up with a great idea, right? And so I think most startups, a lot of the work we do with startups is to help them, like that level of discipline, bringing like proper marketing diligence, proper technology. Like, if you look at our startup, JustBoardrooms.com, it's a marketplace. It's like an Airbnb of professional meeting spaces, and there's other marketplaces out there. But we aren't like two kids in a basement banging out code. We are actually being incubated. It's enterprise level software engineers building this thing. It's built in a way that is designed to scale as a global platform. So even though we're very new, it just launched in March, we built the infrastructure to be a global platform. So you got to look ahead. You got to look down the trail. What are you building? Why are you building it? And how do you build a business model and a platform that will withstand the buffeting of winds that you're going to face, right? So I think a lot of this is down to that kind of foresight and planning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the challenge is with a lot, I think a lot of times with startups, and so address this, how, because you're working with, established companies, like you say, that are paying you in the incubator side of things, but there's so often so much unknown when it comes to bringing a product to market, and the product market fit is, what can I mean, I saw like when you had your case, and everybody that's listening, right? So Let me just tell you the website. It is the turnlab, theturnlab.com. And there's case studies there and things like that. And I guess there's probably, if people want to come into your incubator, they can come. Is there some way that they can apply through that as well? Just as cover that.
Yeah, we have this great little tool called the strategy hack, and it's our way of kind of like showing people how we work, as well as them learning a little bit about us. We take applications for it because we don't open it to everyone. So on our website, if you go to our website, there will be a little pop-up that comes up, or there's a link called strategy hack, and you just fill out, what's the problem you're trying to solve, what company, give us a little bit of background in company. And then we have a committee that assesses, who qualifies. And we try to do 1 or 2 a month. So that we can, lean in and help out. And sometimes we can keep moving forward on that. But, I think the thing that we learn from dealing with these big companies with these big problems is that they're all unique. And so that's why we try not to sell solutions. We try to fall in love with the problem. That's how we operate. And every company has a unique problem. And I think when startups look for help, they often get very canned solutions, and that rarely works. If a consultant or a partner or an investor doesn't really do a deep dive into the company and what are the challenges it's facing, what are the market conditions, that market intelligence piece is huge. You mentioned earlier about how do I know if this product is going to be viable? Do your diligence. There's so many ways to research now. Talk to your customer. There's so many ways to do that. There are consumer panels available. We host our own 10,000 member consumer panel. There's all kinds of ways to get audience intelligence, and do that. Do your diligence. Don't think your idea is golden until you prove it out.
Right. Yeah. And that's where that it ties together with that company that I was stuck in the Midland, like in Yamaha's case. I think when I gathered from that is that they had they were realizing that as a brand, they probably for years have been, you go, you test drive, and this is what I surmise from it, so correct me when I'm is that they and then but everybody, so much is being done online or investigated or researched, particularly like on a mobile phone. Somebody thinks about, I want to get a motorcycle and stuff like that. And they were it seems like they anticipated they needed to do some serious sort of re-envisioning how they interacted with their customer, or else they'd get left behind. They were right at that point where they must have had some analytics to say things are happening, we're missing some stuff. And, and you guys, I just looked at the case study, and you guys really dug into the data of what was going on. And if the example of what's on that page is an example of what you did for their website, yeah, man, it made me want to buy a Yamaha.
Listen, all companies face challenges at different points in their, Yamaha's an established legacy brand, but they're definitely having a bit of a share challenge. And so, to your point earlier, the way people shop for motorbikes, cars, anything are very different now. People buy $100,000 cars sight unseen online now. So we had to help them, turn their website, which was basically a product catalog, into a full experience. And I think how we got to that conclusion is we asked the customer. They had a database of customers. We polled them, we ran workshops, we did focus groups, we really learned what were they expecting. And what we learned is the first place that people go to investigate is obviously online, and sometimes not even at the manufacturer's website. They're listening to influencers on YouTube. They're looking at social media, a lot of them forums. So when they do eventually land on the brand website, it better not be lunch bag letdown, right? It better be full experience. So on the Yamaha website now, you can configure your vehicle with a 3-dimensional tool. You can, choose your colors, choose your accessories. You can build and price. You can basically do a virtual showroom, right? So, and then you can book a test ride right on the website. So these are kind of the things that, are products of the insights that came out of the research. So we didn't say, oh, we love the idea of a configurator. No, we found out that it was a necessary customer experience, which enhanced their business. And honestly, over the last few years, they couldn't stock enough products. Like they had some transformational sales. We'd like to think we were part of that. But that was changing the customer experience. And that really made a big difference for the company.
Yeah. I think that I could, because I remember them sort of drifting and, and then kind of a resurgence. So that, similar to some of the other motorcycle brands that, were 100-year-old companies that, had to figure out a way to stay relevant. Right. So,
for sure.
And then, and I think that ties back for the investors and the entrepreneurs that are listening, is that the product market fit is such a key part of it. And it is definitely, and we've said this, Howard said it too, way too many startups don't spend enough time understanding who's going to buy it and why. I had it was an aha moment for me because I kind of knew that, but it was probably like a decade ago. It was one of the guy that led one of the incubators here in Atlanta. And he talked about the authentic customer. And that's not the person that you as a startup says, oh, would you buy this? Because particularly if they're your friend, they're going to say yes, right? They're not necessarily, but if you're going to say, would you pay $100 for this? And then they're thinking about all the other things they could spend $100 for, and they don't really know what they would do with it or what problem it would solve. The answer is going to be no. So they're not an authentic customer. Right. So you understanding truly what you solve. And I bet you would have some insights on this, on the competition. When I like a lot of startup plans I've looked at over the years, but the whole, you're going to make you laugh here in a second. The whole that there is no competition. There is never a situation that there is no competition. Right. Because even if you are a brand new product and nobody's doing it like you, your customer is solving that problem in some way. They've solved it. Now your job is to convince them that the way you solve it is worth them parting with money because you bring them some other value versus how they figured out how to solve it before they knew you had the solution.
One of the biggest mistakes that I've observed is founders thinking that they're the customer. I had this great example. Some early days in my previous company, there was a fellow who brought Home Depot to Canada, so very successful CEO. He launched this big box golf concept, and great idea, 20,000 square foot golf superstore with like virtual driving ranges and putting greens and whatever. But after a year, he was struggling. And so he reached out to me because he knew me through my network. And I looked at his advertising and I noticed that he put all these like super expensive golf equipment at the front of all his ads, like his $700 drivers and whatever. And I said, like, I'm looking at this and I'm getting a little bit of sticker shock from your company. He goes, no, you got to understand, Howard. Golfers are executives. They want the bling. They want to see the Maserati. I said, well, you know what our research shows? Our research shows that 80% of the golf market are public course golfers. They're plumbers, carpenters, middle managers. They're playing 25 rounds of golf, and they may not be buying the $800 driver every day. You may want to. So one of the challenges he thought, because he's a multi-millionaire CEO, he thought his customers were him. And it turned out, and it was a very humbling moment for him. But when he learned, he goes, oh my God, you're right. Mm-hmm. And to his credit, he rotated very quickly. And we eventually built it into a $400 million business. And
there
so
you go.
Audience insights, pivoting, using those insights to drive business decisions. I've seen some great entrepreneurs do that well. I can party to that. And a lot of people just aren't willing to do that kind of work, which is foundational to success.
Yes. Okay. So let's go into the compassion side of capitalism, right? Because I believe the turnlab is a B Corp. Is it a B Corp?
Yeah, we're certified B Corp.
Okay, so this idea of the people, planet, prosperity, but also explain to further, because the idea of a B Corp is not well known in the
Yeah.
marketplace. And even lawyers don't know it very well. That would help companies figure out, should they set up. I was talking to a company the other day and I was like, you need to be a B Corp. Oh, a lawyer said that they're pure on nonprofit and they want to
Oh
raise
yeah.
capital. It's like, you can't raise, all you can do is get donations as a nonprofit. And you have to have profit to go forward. As a B Corp, you could do both. So you made that decision. You're clear. It was that because the incubator is kind of part of the Turn Lab, because you would think the Turn, or is it just because the things that you want to spend money on as the company? Talk about your decision to be a B Corp, and then we'll get into, the triple bottom line.
Well, I think personal values play a huge role in any of these kinds of decisions. And I was raised in a family that believed that, giving back to community, giving back to society is a very high value. So I think it wasn't difficult for me to be running my business with that in mind anyways. But what B Corp does is it kind of systematizes and gives you really good guardrails on how to do that right. And, if there's any proof of, can you do good as you do well, just look at a Patagonia, which is a B Corp. What's their valuation? Like a couple of $1 billion. Like,
okay,
so,
yeah.
you can absolutely try to do good in the world and still do well. No company is perfect. Patagonia's not perfect. We're not perfect. But for example, for the Turn Lab, we run 100% carbon neutral. So that's one of the steps we take. We have very strong practices around giving back to community, giving back to society in terms of, philanthropy, pro bono work. We have a big focus on our employees, worker equity, benefits, engagement. We're also an employee-owned company that we have option shares for all our staff that have been with us for a year or more. It helps with retention, helps with attracting talent. So all of these things are great. They feel good, but because they're authentic, people kind of get it. They're attracted to it. I think it helps the company in many ways. I think most leaders will agree that if you don't have great people that are fully engaged and aligned, it's very hard to build a good product. So the first thing to do is have your people aligned and engaged, and a B Corp status and the work that goes behind it really helps create that alignment.
So for people that say, well, I work for IBM and we volunteer and we do all this kind of stuff and we're trying to do, what's the difference between corporate culture and corporate structure to do
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I think both are valid, right? I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Like I love the grassroots stuff that happens with big banks and whatnot. Like I know some big top 5 bank CEOs and they're trying at their level to do some stuff more at the corporate level, but they're also trying to just help and support what's happening at the grassroots level because they see that as being really important. What happens at the branch, the local branches might do a food drive for the local food bank. That's all great stuff. And you shouldn't stop doing that. I do think that building values around giving back to your community, the planet, et cetera, as part of your culture will help any company, to be honest. Even some oil and gas companies are trying to do better around those spaces, right? And yes, some of it could be greenwashing and some of it could be like slapping lipstick on a pig. But the truth is, as more people realize the importance of it, I think more boards, more investors are going to start thinking, you know what? Maybe, we make an impact no matter what we do, right? Like, we hear the term impact investing a lot. Yeah, impact investing implies that, yes, we're going to have a good impact, but there's also bad impact, right? So being thoughtful around the impact we make is going to be really important for business leaders, but also as people that work for companies that want to work for a great company, be part of creating that great company. Don't just expect it to come from the top.
Yeah, I think so. Because I think, because not every state, does B Corps, at least in the US. Not
That is
every,
true.
Georgia does.
Yes.
And so that's why I think one of the reasons why it's not as clearly understood. And I believe, I don't know this, maybe because you're actually a B Corp and looked into it. And that's something that's important to you. Did it come from the conscious capitalism movement, or was it just was it more like a not like the big companies like a Patagonia and that drove that because they wanted to be able to have their nonprofit mission in the same umbrella as their for-profit mission?
I think the conscious capitalism movement was absolutely a catalyst for the B Corp movement. As the founders themselves were working in industry and were capitalists themselves, but wanted to find more meaning in their work. And they decided that, to do this right, they had to figure out a better way of doing it. And I think B Corp started very humbly as a small organization. When we joined, there was like, I don't know, 80 B Corps in Canada and maybe 800 or 900 in the US. I think now there's 1,200 in Canada. So it's not huge, but it's growing slowly and gaining some momentum. And I think what's happening is when people look at Ben & Jerry's or look at Patagonia, they go, well, they're pretty profitable and yet they still manage to do good in the world. Maybe I should look at that model a little more closely. So the big difference between B Corps and stakeholders, the big difference between B Corps and regular companies is they don't just look at shareholders, they look at stakeholders, right? And so when you consider stakeholders, that isn't just about the bottom line. That's your employees, that's the planet, that's your community, that's your customers. And I think you build a better business because it's more holistic, right? If you're just for profit and you grind your workers, that's not sustainable. If you screw your customers just to get a profit, that's not sustainable. How do you create win-win-wins? That's really what we think about more as B Corp leaders. How do we make it a sustainable business?
And then, because part of it, the government doesn't really care about that stuff, but it's your shareholders that now have a clearer picture of how resources are deployed, in that they maybe not all the profit goes out to shareholders and dividends or things like that, that it's used to create a better corporate culture. And there's, that's probably one area that I have not been clear on is the governments or the states or wherever, they don't really matter. It's really a matter of accountability to your stakeholders and your shareholders. Is that true?
But interestingly, at least in Canada, we're noticing government grants and funding are now getting more closely tied to things like sustainability, are now starting to get more closely tied to some social values pieces as well. So yes, government doesn't directly impact, but if you're looking at funding sources, both in the US and Canada now, there's sort of these values that are being placed on funding now that B Corps tend to be more attractive for some of these funding options. So there are some, pure economic benefits as well as, listen, we all talk about brand, and 87% of millennials and Gen Zs today want to know the values of the company they're working for. So they're also consumers, by the way. So if you look at this huge, massive consumers out there, they're looking at every product and service and going, okay, if I could choose between one that's basically raping and pillaging and one that's actually giving back a little bit, I think I might choose the one that's giving back a little bit, all things being the same. So that's why a company like Patagonia is winning, right? Like they're gaining market share more and more, especially with younger consumers, because that stuff matters to them.
Yes. Okay, so kind of within that vein of the planet profit people, one of your other clients that is was on your website as a case study, Oceanwise.
Yeah.
Right. So they lost this key customer partnership and needed to be rediscovered, kind of lost in a sea of anonymity. Talk about what they do, because I don't want to assume, and I don't want to say I didn't actually Google them. and they but it was more than just, digital marketing to raise awareness that you did for them as this company. But, talk a little bit about that process of a company that is totally, into that, triple bottom line, and they needed to, elevate themselves again.
Yeah, so Oceanwise is a North American-based ocean conservation organization that wants to be global. So they have global ambitions. Their CEO, who's Swedish, came here, who was a country head of Greenpeace, looked at what they were doing and going, wow, like you're so North American, kind of like not being nearly as global thinking as maybe a European not-for-profit might be, very insular within North America. But their bigger problem was the fact that they were anchored with a big aquarium, actually the Vancouver Aquarium, which was a very big aquarium, and they decoupled during COVID for financial reasons. And so Oceanwise now was sort of sitting alone. Now they reached out initially because they just simply needed a new logo because they lost their logo to the aquarium, and they're kind of set adrift with no logo. So that was first. And so they had a pretty big budget because the Vancouver Aquarium paid them a lot of money for the physical assets. So they had a bit of money. So they went out globally and they went to the top branding agencies in London, UK, New York, LA. And we got called in because we rebranded another big conservation organization a few years ago that they heard about. And we came in and we're up against Olin's Wolf, Chandelier, these huge, basically companies that branded Uber and Airbnb. And so we said, listen, we're not going to go up against these guys to design a logo. But we said, we don't actually think that's your problem. That's just one thing. The biggest problem is that there's this huge sea of sameness amongst ocean conservation organizations. They all look the same, smell the same, feel the same. Who are you? What's your why? What's your purpose? And how do we bring that to life through really understanding your donor base, your audience engagement? Because they don't just do ocean conservation, they also certify seafood. So they work with huge partners, like big grocery chains in the US and Canada to certify seafood that's more sustainable. So they're actually a bit of a CPG partner as well. So they're a complex organization. They do seaforestation, beach cleanup, ocean, they do all these different things, but really understanding what is the actual business model. So the pitch was interesting because, all of these big creative agencies came in and pitched, here's all these amazing logos we've done. 30 minutes before our pitch, I called the CEO and said, look, I could tell you about the work we've done, but I'd rather take the 90 minutes you've given us and do a strategy hack with you. I'd rather, here's what we think your problem is. If you agree, let's spend 90 minutes workshopping that. And he kind of was surprised, but he agreed. And at the end of it, he goes, no one is here to solve our problem but you guys. You guys literally have spent time to fall in love with their problem. And so they hired us basically on the spot for a big 6-figure engagement to do their so-called rebrand, which really led to a ton of intelligence work that's now helping inform their business strategy. So that's a great example of how, we're here to be thought partners, not just hands. Anybody can design a logo. To be honest with you, AI could probably design a great logo now. But how do you do it that supports the business objective? So now if you look at the Oceanwise, the way they present themselves, they're so different from every other ocean conservation organization because the business demanded it. And I think that's a great example of an outcome through research and strategy.
Yeah. Well, and also it shows an example of a somewhat mature. How long have they been in business when they came to you?
Well, they've been around for about 20 years, but they were largely unknown for the most part.
Because they had so integrated with the aquarium as part of their identity, even though they had this seafood certification or whatever business, they had these other things that they were doing, but really, really multifaceted, but they themselves had slipped into a kind of a complacency because it worked. It sort of let them do these other things without realizing that they really were a full landscape of problems they solve when it comes to sustainable and healthy, sustainable ways that you interact with the ocean waters.
I don't know whether you know this, but I certainly don't know this, but over 50% of our breathable oxygen comes from the ocean. So, every second breath we take comes from the ocean. So, and that was one of the key findings. We people just don't know this stuff. And even people who care didn't know what to do about it. So a lot of that evidence came down to, hey guys, this isn't just about research anymore. One of the business platforms or pillars you must build is action. So what are you doing about it? So they built all this programming around not just education, but action, ocean cleanup, sea kelp forestation to help produce more oxygen in the ocean. So I think there's a big connection between brand and business. And I think that was a great example of that connection.
Yeah, so good. So those are two great ones for those established companies, but also for the investors and entrepreneurs listening that's to understand it is so easy. Branding is not a logo, right? That's what we drum that home. And sometimes we forget that. We forget that like everybody must know that by now. But it's a total holistic into what is your corporate culture, what is your purpose in the marketplace, what are the problems that you're solving, and bringing that all together, and then figuring out how to communicate it so the people you want to know that will know that. So um
At the very core, your brand is your story, and stories are how we remember things. So
mhm,
if you don't have a story, you will not be remembered. And I
yeah.
think if every leader needs to understand that. And I talked to a huge one of the biggest green energy companies in North America, and we're in the middle of a brand project for them. And I had the CEO in the room, their COO in the room, and I asked them, listen, can you guys right now explain the why and the what behind your company in the same language? And they all looked at each other and they basically shook their heads because
Wow.
they didn't have their story down. And so, there even big companies struggle with this. So startups, like, wow, like sometimes the founder has a story, which might change from cocktail party to cocktail party as they're
Yeah.
schmoozing angel investors. But if we're not singing from the same song sheet as an organization, people start going, well, what's going on here? Why are they saying A when they're really saying B over here? So getting consistent, rowing together, singing from the same song sheet, however you want to put it, you want to get aligned, you want to get your story straight, you want to be consistent, it's got to be tight, and it's got to be memorable. We're feeling creatures that think, not thinking creatures that feel. We feel first.
Ooh.
So as storytellers, we need to engage emotionally. And that's what great brands do. So whether it's a Nike or an Apple, no one's buying an iPhone 15 for $1,800 because it's just the technology. They love the story. They love the
Mhm.
story behind Apple and what it does. So it adds tremendous value to your brand if you've got a great story.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And I guess as we get ready to wrap up, I want to circle back to boardrooms, just
Yes.
boardrooms, because I thought when I looked at that, I went, "Oh, wow, how I can't believe nobody else is doing that. Is anybody else doing that? Somebody must be doing that." I had one of those aha moments, and as I took it just in looking at the site, and I see the opportunity because it is utilizing the unused boardrooms in all different kinds of offices, not just your virtual workspace or your co-working spaces. It's any place that has unutilized, because a lot of businesses have gone into what we're now calling, I think they're calling the fourth wave of industrialization or something like that. And that's where and because people are like, oh, hybrid, I'm in the office, I'm not in the office, but I do need to have a meeting, and I can't do it at Starbucks, and I don't have a relationship with, well, WeWork's not anymore, but I don't have a relationship with whatever other kind of a Regis or something, right? To just walk in off the street and, talk about, was it a need that you built a company around, or was it an idea that you validated the need and then built the company? What was your iteration on that as you were incubating them, or, making that come to life?
First of all, I'm going to hire you as my pitch person because you did a great job summing that up. No, we in the middle of the pandemic, we were looking for problems to solve because that's what we are. We're problem solvers, and a lot of our research was showing this kind of growing collaboration deficit and growth in mental health issues amongst remote knowledge workers. So people that are working from home on their computers, working through the little pinhole of Zoom and Teams to try to interact with people. And we said, listen, as these lockdowns start opening up, we've got to create frictionless ways for people to come together to meet for moments that matter, right? And so the coffee shop may not be the best idea, especially post-COVID, but we also guessed, and we were 100% right, that people weren't going to go back to the office 5 days a week, that there's some kind of hybrid model going on. We also understand that with commuting pressures, et cetera, people don't always want to go to the office to meet And we're seeing now a kind of a hub and spoke model that's happening for companies. There's also so many more gig workers happening out there now, consultants and freelancers because of COVID. So the problem we were trying to solve was to really kind of help overcome this collaboration deficit, which was impacting things like worker mental health, but also impacting things like product quality, innovation, because when you're not getting together with people, you're not innovating in the same way. Harvard Business Review posted a study fairly recently that showed you're 10 times more likely to close a sales deal in person than over a call. So there is a huge need to still bring people together. But the other problem that came out of it was, oh, we're also helping to solve the underutilization of real estate challenge, right? So a great example is that we have a boardroom that sits in the front of our office. We have a beautiful 11,000 square foot office. We have several boardrooms, but the one at the front, which our receptionist manages, is empty most of the time. So on the platform, we've now rented it out multiple times, helps offset the rent, which is awesome. But also, we've met some new and interesting business people. So, you know, if you're a professional office, you're a lawyer, an accountant, like everybody needs a lawyer, everybody needs an accountant. Why wouldn't you want a business executive, a consultant to come in and meet? So we like to call ourselves the Airbnb of professional meeting places because we're truly that. We're not trying to only attract the WeWorks and the Reguses. We have law firms, we have ad agencies, we have real estate offices, and it's free to list. So it's so easy, right? You just go to justboardrooms.com, you say list my space, and we only take a 15% take when you rent. So we're basically a marketing expense for you. So it's a great way to, you know, attract, you know what? It's the sharing economy, right? So whether it's Uber, Airbnb, it's just a different way of doing business, and it's a way of utilizing existing resources to generate revenue. And we're growing fast. We're growing double digits, compounded every month. We're now in 250 locations, even though we just launched in March. We're in 55 markets, 25 in the US. So we have high hopes.
Have you hit down to Atlanta yet?
I think we might have only one location in Atlanta, but we're growing. We're in a big push for hosts right now. So we have like 5 in Philadelphia, 8 in Miami, a bunch in Seattle. We're in Dallas now. So we're growing. You'll see more and more of us in Atlanta over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, because I was just, as you were talking about the boardroom in the front that doesn't get used, I don't even know how many offices I walk into or have where exactly that. It's the big, fancy, pretty one, but it's big or something, you know what I mean? And so that's and even universities, a lot of these universities that are in high rises, they've got those kind of facilities too that might become
Absolutely.
available. So yeah, that's
We have actually a university that hosts one of the rooms. But what I like about our platform is that we don't just have corporate boardrooms. We have like really interesting meeting rooms because there's all like our boardroom here. It's got a beautiful live edge table, these funky mid-modern chairs. It's got beautiful lighting. We're a 5-minute walk from the beach. So the great thing about the platform is that it's so diverse. We have this incredible barn with a meeting space inside the barn just north of the city. That's literally like an Instagram story. Like this place is incredible. So the great thing about what we're trying to do, just like with Airbnb, is you get to curate your experience. You know, if you want a more corporate boardroom, tons of those available on our platform. You want something, you know, we got a wine academy. You can meet inside a beautiful wine cellar. There's all kinds of great experiences, and I think that's you know, the market wants flexibility, right? And that's what we're trying to deliver.
Congratulations for identifying that and jumping on it and getting the success that you have.
And by the way, I'll probably have to ask your advice on this because we're also doing an angel round of funding right now, and that's very new to me. I've always self-funded everything, and I'm mostly self-funding this, but we're raising angel funds to drive marketing and to really drive growth. And so I'm learning so much now about you know, that whole process. So I'm sure you and I will connect later on that.
Yeah, we can book a strategy session.
Yes.
All right. So what would any golden nuggets you want to leave with the audience before we say onwards and upwards and all that?
Yeah, I think the one message I'll leave is there really is no straight line to success, right? Like someone looks at me and go, wow, you've been so lucky. Like, look at all the success you built. You know, you built these great companies, you know, you got all these things. many pitfalls along the way, right? And so I think the greatest quality you can have is to be resilient, to understand that you are going to fall, you're definitely going to skin your knees, and that's okay. Just get up. And even though those first few steps aren't so easy after you get up, like, believe me, when I went bankrupt and I went from driving a Porsche, owning my house, to being a single dad in a basement of my parents for 9 months,
Oh, wow.
that was skinning my
That'll
knees
mess with your
hard,
head. It'll mess with your
hard.
head.
Yeah. And it was a slow walk out of the basement, but I did it. And I had cancer to deal with. I had a suicide of a very close family member happen fairly recently. These are all setbacks we're all going to face, but um, they're all okay as long as you remember that they can just be temporary. You can get up, you can ask for help, you can ask for a hand up and keep moving. And as long as you're willing to do that, persistence is probably one of the biggest qualities of most entrepreneurs I know. And fail fast and get up and keep going.
Yes. I can't even think of anything to say on top of that. That was perfect. So with that, Howard Chang, thank you very much for being on the Compassionate Capitalist Show. Please go to theturnlab.com. The link's in the show notes to get connected with Howard, and share this podcast with the people that you know, because it's good info here, good messages, and thank you for being on the show. Onwards and upwards.
Thank you so much.